Imagine living your life after 50 and feeling energized and excited about your future. Welcome to the Women in the Middle podcast, the podcast for women who are ready to figure out what they want and create the life they deserve. Here's your host and Master Certified Life Coach, Susie Rosenstein.
Hey there, today's episode is all about intentional storytelling, sharing your childhood and life stories in midlife. Let's go. Welcome back to the podcast, Women in the Middle, Loving Life After 50. I'm your host, Susie Rosenstein, your Master Certified Life Coach and Midlife Mentor, and I am so glad to be here with you again. Today, I want to coach you on a fun idea that you can be super intentional about with your family. It's basically another simple thing that you can do for yourself to make sure that you don't have regrets. I'm talking about making it an intentional habit to share your stories with your kids, your partner, and your family in general. Now you might be thinking, I don't remember my childhood stories that well. What happened? I don't remember. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised that the more you share, the more you remember. And there are lots of other good reasons and ways to do this, and we'll be talking about them. In fact, that is one comment I get from doing the podcast is, how can you remember so much from your childhood? Even my sister says that, one of my sisters. How can you remember all those details? And you know, at the beginning of doing this podcast thing, back in 2017, it seemed daunting to me. But the more I focus it on the topic that I'm talking about, and I kind of like just go through my mind, what happened then? What's relevant? How can I tell this story? How can I make it interesting? And believe it or not, I remember more and more. And I really do think that you can too. It's practice. So anyway, just quick, before we dive into this super fun topic, and it really is a fun one, I have a question for you. Are you ever number one in your life, that is, or a slight variation? Are you number one enough? Think about it. I heard a story recently from someone in my community who was celebrating a win in this regard. She wanted to go someplace alone, and she did it. She resisted the urge to include others, even though they asked. She wanted to have that experience of being by yourself, and she had her own back and put herself first. So that's what I'm talking about. That is winning. It's intentional, and you put yourself first. And it doesn't just mean you have to go places alone, but it's that sort of thing. Like, this woman noticed that that's what she wanted, and she honored it. Now, it's not always easy to do, but by your age and my age, you've got decades of experience putting others first, doing what they need, thinking about what they need, stepping up to help. It's a lot of extra bandwidth and energy, and it's probably just who you are and how you've been rolling. But it's probably time for you to start connecting with some of your own priorities too. So think about this. What would it be like to not worry about being an autopilot people pleaser so that you felt comfortable with others about what you really want or how you really feel? What would that be like? What would it be like to be clear about what you wanted in your next chapter, rather than feeling a bit bored about doing the same stuff over and over again, year after year? What would it be like to feel peaceful and fulfilled about how you're showing up and what you're focusing on in your life, and know that you're doing what you want to do and what you're meant to do? My friend, if you resonate with these examples, that's just a little taste of what you get when you join the Women in the Middle Happiness Academy, where I help women like you over 50 embrace their gift of aging with excitement and peace. Yes, really. Really! The Women in the Middle Happiness Academy is a hybrid 1-year community and group coaching experience that can help you figure out what you want and then feel comfortable and courageous enough to pursue it and feel great about it. It's a guided experience to regret-proof your life. Being in the midlife coaching space now for 10 years, I know what works. Academy members have told me, and I quote, "It's like having a safe place to land, with great coaching and like-minded women that you can trust and be vulnerable with while you're actually growing forward. It's a critical part of being happier in midlife. And it's not as hard as it seems. It can be hard to imagine, though, when you feel so stuck, so I totally get that. If working with me has been something you've been thinking about, please reach out and get your questions answered. As you know all too well, life is short, and it is important to stop wasting valuable time. So let's talk about it and see if we're a good fit. Plus, now is the perfect time to get in on the new bonuses. So book your fun, free, no obligation Zoom call, and I'll tell you all about the bonuses then. Next year can be way better and way different than this year, but you have to take some action. I would love to be your midlife coach and help you feel more peaceful and excited about your future. So head over to www.womeninthemiddleacademy.com and you'll find the link there. Looking forward to seeing your name in my calendar. Now, let's dive into today's topic, intentional storytelling, the importance of sharing and passing down your stories, the little ones, the big ones, the silly ones, the important ones, and everything in between. Now, I think that sharing your childhood and life stories with your family can turn into a deeply meaningful, informal tradition that you can be super intentional about. Curating and sharing your stories is a way to connect the past to the present in a way that can foster love, understanding, and even a sense of belonging. For me, it's also about creating a bridge between generations and family members that your kids may or may not have ever even met. Think about it, right? When you tell stories about some people in your life, they're not on their radar. And if they knew them when they were small, they don't have any memories now or very few. It's a way to help my family know not just who I am, but also where they come from, which can be really different from where they live now and the times that they live in. Now, you know that. It's so obvious. I mean, right away, a typewriter popped into my head because somebody was telling me they inherited this old typewriter yesterday. And I'm thinking, yeah, I had a typewriter. And then I had, what was that thing called? A daisy wheel in university. And I was typing people's papers for money. Nobody does that now. Many people don't even know how to touch type like we learned in high school. It's just such a different time. And that's like the tiniest of examples, but it just popped into my mind now. Anyway, legacy is something that you may be thinking about in midlife. It comes up a lot. So these stories we're talking about are more than memories. When you think about it, they're really pieces of a legacy that can help shape the values, identity, and sense of purpose for those family members who come after you. And maybe more than that, maybe your stories go beyond your family. And as I alluded to, legacies can be big and small. They can be serious and silly. For example, sharing your love of music can be a legacy, and so can being a founding member of a nonprofit that has meant a lot to you over the years. Very different stories and experiences, and both are important. I remember my mom telling me a story how, there was so much snow and she had to schlep 5 miles in the big snowbanks with her saxophone. And then what happened to me? I inherited her saxophone and I was schlepping it around, not 5 miles in the snow, but I did schlep it around. And one summer I schlepped a baritone sax to Europe on a big 3-week band type program that I had to audition for. Like, believe me, I share those stories, and those stories about the saxophone were shared with me. So these stories are great. And I love that I think about that story with my mom and the saxophone. And I had that thing for a very long time until I replaced it. Anyway, like I was saying, very different stories and experiences, and both are important. So be careful not to get overwhelmed. It's kind of the same way with the word legacy. So please don't get overwhelmed by that. Let's just stick with the storytelling and sharing. So I want to share a bit about why sharing these stories feels important to me. Now, the first reason is quite personal. As you may know, I have far outlived both of my birth parents. My mother died at 32 when I was only 5. My father died at 41 when I was only 12. And I craved hearing their stories, as I didn't have that many memories or personal stories of my own. I did everything I could to find out more and piece things together about their lives, even reaching out to some of their friends. For example, I had the opportunity to write letters to my mother's best friend when she was in high school. So I think this was in the 80s. I think it was the 80s or early 90s. And I wrote letters to her, and they were best friends back in the day and went to school together. And she was an amazing source of information, including sharing a story with me in photos about having a nose job together. Now, I never knew about this. I never knew my mother had a nose job. This friend had actual photos of the two of them because they did it together when they were 16. I never expected that. Her sisters didn't tell me. Nobody else in the family told me. I just never knew about it. So it was so fascinating to get those pictures and to hear all of the stories that she had to share. Now, I also reached out to the Alumni Association of my father's undergrad university, specifically the secretary of their graduating class. This was in the early 90s. I sent him an email and asked him to share my request for anyone who had memories of my father from those days. And 3 men in their 70s reached out to me. So they were older men by then, right? Much older. And I loved hearing about my dad as a 20-year-old. They had crystal clear memories of their times together and how close they were as friends. So that was winning big time. So I was so pleased that I took the initiative and reached out to these special people in my parents' lives. And I'm the beneficiary of the stories, and then I've got these stories to share with others. Now, another reason that sharing stories is important is that it's a way to honor your journey, celebrate the moments that have shaped you in your life, and acknowledge the challenges that you've overcome. It's also a way to preserve the richness of small details in life, really small details. Now, I know I've talked about mud pies a lot over the last 7.5 years of this podcast. If you missed one of those episodes, it was something I had a memory about when I was, 7, 8 years old, something like that. And I used to love making mud pies in my friend Judy's backyard. She had this far back corner. We made like a quasi fort in the back corner of the yard, and we would make the mud pies and let them dry out. And I don't think we did anything else with them. It's the tiniest little detail, but it meant something to me, and I shared it. I also have shared things about what it felt like to grow up in a certain era, like the way I interviewed a few of my high school friends when we all turned 60, and we talked about what it was like growing up in our smallish town in the 70s. So that's really different than what your kids have experienced in their lifetime. Also, all the lessons I learned from the elders in my family, parents, step-parents, aunts, uncles, grandparents, and also teachers and professors along the way, and some super wise friends. And of course, lessons you learned on your own, and even some of the mistakes you may have made along the way. So all this stuff, rich stories, and sometimes big stuff comes out of it, and sometimes life's very small details. One lesson my grandpa Fred shared was to always do it right the first time. And this lesson was told to me, observed by the way I was handling something as a kid. I believe I was under 10. And it was the way I was folding up an Afghan blanket. I was basically rolling it up in a ball. And he said, no, do it right the first time. That tiny little moment, I don't remember him telling me before this. This was at his house in Connecticut, in the family room. I remember it so clearly, this little tiny memory. And I've shared that story. Do it right the first time. That was a lesson. And my grandma Ethel, yes, that was Fred and Ethel. They were married. She used to always have fruit as a snack. She was sick. She had a heart problem, and she was always on the couch with her Afghan blanket. And I just remember her clearly being very regular about having fruit as her snack. Not just the eating it, but cutting it up and the way she ate it on the table that was in the family room. And I just have a clear memory of that in my childhood. She also always painted my nails in her pretty little makeup table by her bed. And for sure, my love of nail polish came from those early days. I learned to love both of those things, fruit and nail polish. And I also learned the importance of fierce loyalty from my Aunt Jane and extreme patience and kindness from my Aunt Frances. My Uncle Bob taught me lots, but the main thing has been to celebrate life by taking time to acknowledge the special moments in creative, unique ways, like making a celebratory winner's cup for an annual backgammon tournament that he and his wife played. I learned the importance of showing up 100% when practicing from my music teacher and band director, whose nickname was Fred, another Fred, and the sweet, palpable joy that comes from a solid team effort, like in our marching band competition and experiences over the years. Now, these reflections help me now too, just like yours do. They can bring up clarity. They can bring meaning to my own life, how I show up, what's important to me, who I respect, and why. When you're older and wiser, you have your own wisdom and perspective as a lens to look at your life differently and see the important character threads that run through all of it. For me, things like resilience, perseverance, creativity, and passion, they always stand out. I also think of sharing stories as a special act of self-expression that feels grounding and empowering. Stories add unique flavor. It's flavor of who you really are and how you got there. Stories kind of fill in the blanks for people who may not have known you your whole life, like your kids. They fill in the blanks, they explain things. Now, speaking of your kids, I think stories hold special importance for them. Well, one thing is they make fun of you for them, but also it's related to what I was just saying about how they help fill in the blanks of who you are and why. With my kids, who are in their mid to late 20s now, hearing my stories gives them a deeper understanding of who I am beyond my role as a mom living where we live in this time period. My childhood couldn't have been more different from theirs, losing both parents and being raised by my stepmother, who is their loving grandmother. And it's just really all something they can't understand, like does not compute. They try to understand, they know the facts, but it's a crazy childhood. Growing up in a single parent household as the oldest of 5 kids was tough on all fronts. Money was tight, stress was terrible. My kids' childhood was stable and without the same kind of life-altering stressors. Thank goodness. I think by telling them stories from this time period, it makes me more relatable. It explains some things and helps them see me as a person with a lot of curiosity, a good sense of humor, plenty of fears, worries, and successes of my own, triumphs, big things that I had goals about and that I pushed forward on. I try to share stories and use my age so it's easier for them to relate. Like, this is what I was doing when I was 19, or this is what was going on when I was 12, or whatever it is. And please also know, it wasn't all doom and gloom back then. I made sure to tell them about my first concert. Did you tell your kids about your first concert? Which was also the first time I ever smelled pot. That was the David Bowie concert in 1976 at the Philadelphia Spectrum. And how I got grounded after I got my driver's license because my mom didn't think I used good judgment to go to get my driver's license on a day when it was snowing lightly. It was like those giant flakes that you can look at on your pea jacket, on your coat, and then they melt quickly, but they land on your coat intact. So I didn't think it was dangerous. Everything was melting as soon as it hit the ground. Of course, I was not an experienced driver. I got grounded for, get this, 6 months in a single parent household with 5 kids where she could have really used the help with another driver. I couldn't drive with my freshly minted driver's license for 6 months. Now, my kids never got grounded for 6 months. Times have changed. One of the stories that stands out for my kids was in a park near my childhood house. And I showed them that there was an underground fort there. So when I was in junior high, my neighborhood friends and I had this underground fort. Now, if somebody tells you they have an underground fort, it sounds ridiculous, like nobody's going to believe you. But I drove them to the park. There were no remnants left anymore. But I showed them exactly where it was. You had to climb down a hole, maybe, I don't know, maybe it was 4 feet down or so, maybe 5, and crawl through a short tunnel to go in an underground room. There were actually 2 rooms, not huge rooms, but you could lay down in them. And of course, they were these rooms with air holes held open by tennis cans that went to the outside. That was a good one. Who would believe that? I wasn't involved in the digging, but I was in that little group of friends, so I was included in the secret fort. And the stories from the band bus. Now, have you been in band? One time, we got 17 kids in the bus bathroom on the way down to Florida for a national competition. Another good one. They can definitely relate to that. Maybe not shoving all these kids, squeezing into a bus bathroom, but they can relate to the idea of shenanigans on a long bus ride. Now, these stories also provide them with a sense of connectedness and continuity, helping them see how they're part of a bigger picture. You know what I mean? A bigger picture, like you're not just a grown-up, you were a kid. And it's all part of a narrative that was decades and decades in the making, especially when you start telling stories that also came from your parents and your grandparents. It's fascinating. So stories teach life lessons in a way that is engaging and memorable. This is another reason why I think they're so great. Stories that go way back to your early childhood when the only technology you had was a hairdryer, a calculator, and a transistor radio. That can be fun too. And I remember all of those things, especially getting my first calculator in grade 11 and my first transistor radio when I was 12. I remember Seasons in the Sun was the big song then, and I just couldn't stop listening to it on my transistor radio in one of those, what are those lounge chairs called that have all the plastic piping that goes back and forth and you get all these weird lines in your skin when you're laying out with inappropriate oil. Just crazy times. But anyway, that's all part of that story. Do you remember what we used to do on long car rides? That was really different than it is today. We didn't have smartphones or any entertainment like that. I don't know about you, but I had raindrop races on the car windows and did the car alphabet game. You know, the one where you look for words that start with every letter of the alphabet. And of course, this was often done while not wearing a seatbelt and in a car filled with secondhand smoke. Crazy times, my friend. And can you imagine what would happen if you suggested to your kids to have raindrop races while on a long car ride, put their phone down? It's so different. Life is so different. And sometimes we feel old, but a lot of times we know that we're not that old. And still things are so different. Now, if you were lucky, you behaved enough on these car rides so your parents didn't have to threaten you with pulling over to the side of the road and letting you out. I also shared stories about what we did on sleepovers. Like, I don't know about you, but we played Monopoly for hours and hours and hours. And then when I was old enough, I think it was when I was 12 or 13, we got to watch Monty Python's Flying Circus. A huge crowd pleaser. Well, actually, probably not for everybody, but that my sense of humor thought it was amazing. And also, one great story I tell is what it was like when I got mono in grade 10. So I was 15. I was so sick for 3 weeks, like I couldn't move. And the way I explained the exhaustion and pain that I was in was that I was so sick that I couldn't get up off the couch to change the channel. No remote control back then. It was $10,000 pyramid all the way. Now, they know that my favorite show was The Brady Bunch. I've talked about that forever. I purchased the whole series when they were small, first on VHS, and then it came out on DVD. And we watched it together when they were kids. And the super funny scenes many, many times, especially the tarantula scene with Peter from their trip to Hawaii. And another Peter one was really funny, was pork chops and applesauce that I'm sure you know as well. Hilarious. And they thought it was funny when they were kids. Here's the thing. These stories tend to stick. They can inspire your family to think about their own values, decisions, and dreams. What's funny for them? What's easy for them? What's interesting to them? What do you have in common? What is different? When I shared how I handled tough situations like flubbing a saxophone solo during a concert in high school, celebrated milestones like graduations, traveling abroad for the first time, or when I found joy in unexpected places like my first entrepreneurial gig with calligraphy when I was 12 and doing wedding envelopes, I'm giving them tools and perspectives they can carry with them. These are, like I said, some are big and some are small. But they're stories and they're part of my life and they stick. It's also a way to instill traditions and family values, and it kind of ensures that they're passed down, or at least that they feel personal and meaningful and get considered to pass down. One of these for me has been my love of guacamole and avocados, simple and delicious. And I tell them about my dad's cousin Erwin from California who visited once, and he's the one. When I was in high school, I didn't know about avocados or guacamole until I was in high school. He made it for our family in the kitchen in our Pennsylvania home, and like when I was a kid, and I was fascinated. I'd never seen an avocado before. I knew nothing about, and I watched him and he taught me how to make guacamole. And I have to say, that changed my life. For years, I was one of the few people that loved and felt comfortable making guacamole, like in university. And I always made sure that I was the one to bring it to a party, homemade. Another one for me has been my love of animals and even being a fish keeper since I was 10 with aquariums. I still have a 90-gallon aquarium. And also music, playing and listening and especially on high quality speakers because it makes a huge difference. That got passed down. And there's another thing, and it's all about connection. Life today happens at quite a different rate of speed than it used to in the good old days. Everything is super fast paced with multitasking gone crazy, both online and not online. Storytelling is a way to slow down and connect on a deeper level, even if it's brief. It's a chance to sit together. Sometimes I find the best place to sit together is in the car when they're kind of trapped. They got to sit there with you till you get where you're going. You laugh, you cry, and reflect. It doesn't matter that you're in a car. You don't always need to be sitting on a couch together or, at a dinner table. It can be weird little moments that you can share stories. It fosters intimacy and strengthens family bonds in a way that few other activities can, really. I think it's so true. It's different. My stories, big and small, intelligent and silly, laughing and not, and the act of sharing them remind my family that they're part of something bigger. It really is something bigger. It's a tapestry of emotions and experience, love, creativity, perseverance, like I mentioned before. Nothing in life comes easy, and life can be a lot of fun. These messages come out. I had a revealing experience about a year ago. We were on a long road trip, and I launched into a story that they said I've shared 1,000,000 times before. Now, this does happen on occasion. It happens a lot of times, actually. And in this case, I was surprised by it. So I decided to quiz them, the kids, on how much they remembered from some of my stories while we were driving. It was hilarious. I asked questions like, what was my first rock concert? Who did I hear? Why did I go to Europe in grade 11? What was the name of my first dog? What were the breeds of dogs that I had growing up? Who was my best friend in elementary school that I played jacks with all the time? Who did I take tap dancing with? Who was my best friend in high school? What crazy thing happened at a band competition? Why did I move to Canada? What were the details of that story? Where did I go to university before I moved to Canada? And so on. And you know what? It may seem like they aren't listening to you, but they probably are. My kids got about 95% correct, and I was suitably impressed and proud, both that I had taken the time and prioritized sharing as much as I have over the years, and that they listened. Now, finally, I really do think that sharing stories like this from your life and childhood, it's a gift that you can give your family as well as future generations. Hopefully, long after I'm gone and long after you're gone, these stories will live on, helping our grandchildren and great-grandchildren understand their roots and the people who came before them. Now, there are tools that can help too, like companies that help you compile stories in a book. You can get a book made and people can contribute to the book. It's super easy. And even products that use a QR code and help you pull together legacy-type information, memorials, and the like. Any way you cut it, taking the time to share stories is a worthwhile endeavor. It's a way to leave a legacy that transcends time. It can also help people connect across generations. Remember back in elementary school when you had to interview a grandparent or an older relative to hear stories about what it was like when they grew up? I remember I interviewed a great-grandmother who was still cooking on a coal stove. She was born in the late 1800s. It seemed crazy to me, but I loved doing it. The kind of intentional storytelling that I'm talking about brings that little assignment to a whole new level. Sharing your life stories is about more than reminiscing. Don't get me wrong, reminiscing is amazing and super fun, but it's a richer opportunity than that. It's really about using stories to create meaning, making it easier to connect and ensure that the lessons, the love, the laughter related to your life are never lost. So I give you permission and encourage you to tell the stories. If you're thinking about not telling it, you probably should tell it. The silly ones, the crazy ones, the funny ones, the hard to imagine ones, the big lesson ones, the big dream ones, and the surprising ones. Tell them. The more you tell, the more you remember. I really think intentional storytelling is a very good thing. Okay, that's it for this episode. If you need help on how to be more intentional, more peaceful, more fulfilled with things like aging and midlife transitions, and want to understand how mindfulness can help you get out of your own way so that you're happier overall, I'm your gal. It is way more fun to do this together. Now, as you know, this podcast is all about how to love your life again after 50. It's really all about coaching you to be more intentional and to incorporate mindfulness into your life as a regular practice. This is how you put yourself on your agenda. My focus as your midlife coach is to help you get unstuck, clear, and focused on your current values and priorities so you don't have regrets. This means helping you create the confidence, courage, and meaning that you're looking for. If you're ready to learn more about coaching together, you're invited to apply and book your free, no-obligation momentum call at www.talktosusie.com, and we will chat. One more thing, you're also invited to purchase my new masterclass, Get Unstuck, Midlife Clarity Fast and Easy, where you can get clear about your next chapter priorities without spin, confusion, and overwhelm in less than an hour. Head over to www.midliferoadmap.com. And finally, for show notes and links, head over to www.susierosenstein.com and click the podcast tab and look for episode 387. You'll also see links there for the new show, Women in the Middle Entrepreneurs. Thanks so much for listening. It's time for you to put yourself first, one thought at a time. I'm Susie Rosenstein, and I'll talk to you next week.